Hello there, history students. Welcome to part 2 of the Working Constitution and the Four Cornerstones. As you remember, the purpose here is to show those things that have been put in place to limit the government's power under this new, stronger, more effective U.S. Constitution. The first one was federalism, taking the government's power and slicing it in half and giving half of those powers and responsibilities to the states. The next is going to be the separation of powers. So taking the remaining chunk, if you will, the remaining powers the federal government has, and slicing them into three pieces between the three different branches. The separation of power is the creation of three branches of government, each with its own powers, duties, and checks and balances. Here we're going to take a look at the powers and responsibilities of the three branches. So you have the federal government, and the first branch is the legislative branch. This is Article 1 of the Constitution, and this is made up of the two houses of Congress. Their power is to make the laws. That's what the term legislate means. And the two houses of Congress are the House of Reps and the Senate. You can see that visually here in that picture of the United States Capitol building. On the far left is where the U.S. House of Representatives meets, and then on the far right of the picture is where the United States Senate meets. The powers of Congress are to levy and collect taxes, to borrow money, control foreign and interstate commerce, printing money, granting patents and copyrights, naturalization and bankruptcy laws, declaring war, and supporting the military financially. There's many more powers of the legislative branch, but those are just a few. Now, there are some responsibilities that are divided between the House of Reps and the Senate specifically. So the House of Reps, for example, is where all revenue bills originate. That's a fancy word for taxes. So all tax bills originate in the House. They deal with the impeachment process. They start the impeachment process. We saw that happen live last fall when President Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives. So you could have seen that play out on the news. And if there's no majority vote, so no one person wins a presidential election, if it's a tie in electoral college, the U.S. House of Representatives votes to break that tie. The Senate, they approve presidential appointments. We've seen this playing out on the news with the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. Those have been taking place in the United States Senate. They also ratify treaties, and in the case of impeachment, they act as the jury. And again, we saw that play out last fall. And the vice president has some responsibilities here in the Senate, knowing there's 100 senators, right, 2 per state. If there's any tie on any issues in the Senate, the vice president is the one that breaks that tie. Article 2, their second branch of government, is the executive. That's made up of the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. The cabinet is something we'll talk about more when we get into the presidency. Their responsibility is to enforce the laws. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military. The president can make treaties around the world with other countries. The president appoints cabinet members, Supreme Court judges, all federal court judges, and ambassadors. Once again, the president can appoint those, but it's the Senate that has to approve those appointments. The president gives a State of the Union every year. The president can recommend laws and legislation, can come up with ideas and advocate for them. But again, it's the legislative branch that has to pass those. Then finally, the third branch of government is Article 3, the judicial branch. This is the Supreme Court, those 9 judges, and all the lower federal courts just below the Supreme Court. And their job is to interpret the laws. Right? Think of that word to judge. Right? Judge means to interpret. They try cases involving the Constitution, any federal laws, lawsuits against the government, lawsuits between states, and any accusations of treason. And they can declare laws unconstitutional if they're brought to them. So if Congress passes a law, the president signs it, and someone feels that violates their rights somehow or it's unconstitutional, that argument would take place in the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over the impeachment trial in the Senate. The third cornerstone we have is constitutional flexibility. All right, and this is something that has allowed our Constitution to be the longest and oldest Constitution in the world. right? Because it is flexible. This is the ability of the Constitution to adapt for changing needs of the country. This is done a few different ways. The first one is through the amendment process. There are 27 amendments to the Constitution. It has been changed 27 times. The first 10 obviously showing up all at once with the Bill of Rights in 1791. And then after that, only 17 times since 1791. So it's quite a difficult process to get an amendment passed. You see, you need 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of all the state legislatures. So it's a lot of people to agree to something. That's why it's only happened 17 times since 1791. Next is the elastic clause. This is something that we read about during your constitutional scavenger hunt. The official name for this is the necessary and proper clause. But it gets the nickname the elastic clause because it does what elastic does. It allows the Constitution to grow, to be flexible, and to stretch as the need arises. For example, the founders that wrote this document in 1789 didn't put anything in there about cell phones or air travel or the internet or anything like that. But they did know that things were going to change over time, so they put in the elastic clause. And so now Congress can make laws about those things as they pop up. And finally, is judicial review. The Supreme Court can review and declare laws unconstitutional. So as people challenge different laws coming out of Congress, the Supreme Court has the ability, the flexibility to get rid of those laws if needed. And the final cornerstone is equal rights. The Constitution guarantees all people equal rights. This is something that's been true in theory, kind of on paper, but not always in practice throughout our history. There's been an evolution constitutionally to try to get to that place where everyone does have equal rights. One example that we'll use here is the right to vote. All right, it's very appropriate for the season that we're in. The Constitution is first written in 1789. Only white men over the age of 21 that own land were able to vote. That was expanded with the 15th Amendment in 1870 to give African American males the right to vote. Then we have the 19th Amendment in 1920, giving women the right to vote. The 23rd Amendment gives people living in Washington, D.C., the residents of D.C., the ability to vote in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment outlaws poll taxes, so people used to have to pay to vote. That was gotten rid of. The 24th Amendment. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlaws literacy tests and other barriers to people being able to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowers the voting age from 21 to 18. This takes place during the Vietnam War. As you can see in voting rights, there's this evolution of who can vote that's changed and been expanded and has made voting a little bit easier over time. So our question was at the very beginning, how did the framers create a strong central government but limit its power to protect people's rights? And the answers to that are our 4 cornerstones of federalism, separation of powers, constitutional flexibility, and equal rights.